Avalise does not rush into the penthouse like she usually does. She steps in quietly, one hand still on her purse, expecting the soft comfort of home after a long evening. The place feels wrong at once. Too still, too careful. Only one lamp burns at the far end of the hallway, and its low gold light stops just before the bedroom door, which sits half open like a secret no wife should meet this way. She hears Zevran's voice before she sees him, low, tight, urgent. Avalise slows. Her heels press softly against the floor as she nears the door, not from suspicion at first, but from the strange weight in his tone. This is not the voice he uses in boardrooms. This is not the voice he uses with her at night. She stops. The air turns thin. Then, his whisper cuts through the silence. She still trusts me. After tomorrow, she signs, then I end this marriage. Avalise goes still. Not hurt first, but just cold, like her body understands danger 1 full second before her heart does. The words do not land all at once. They hit her in pieces. She still trusts me. Then, after tomorrow, she signs and I end this marriage. Avalise keeps staring at the thin line of light beneath the bedroom door, as if the floor itself might correct what she heard. Nothing moves. No answer comes fast enough to soften it. No second voice breaks in to save the moment. Only Zevran's hush, steady and sure, like a man discussing terms he has already accepted. Her mind starts gathering every small wound she tried to excuse. The missed dinners, the late replies, the distant look in his eyes when she asked what was wrong, the quiet kisses placed on her forehead instead of real answers. His favorite line returns to her now with cruel new weight. Let me handle it. She finally understands what that line has meant all along. Not trust, not partnership, control. Her throat tightens. Shame rises before tears do. She feels foolish for every time she defended him in her own head. Foolish for every night she chose patience over doubt. She had entered this marriage believing silence meant pressure. In one breath, silence starts to look like planning. Avalise does not push the door open. She does not ask who he is speaking to. She does not give him the chance to shape the moment before she can breathe through it. She steps back on numb legs and walks to the guest room with the calm of someone holding herself together by force alone. The second the door shuts behind her, the quiet becomes brutal. Her hands move before her thoughts settle. She pulls a suitcase from the closet and sets it on the bed. 1 dress, 2 blouses, jeans, toiletries, her passport, a charger, nothing careless, nothing dramatic, only what she needs to leave with dignity. When she reaches for her wedding ring, her fingers stop. For 1 second, she sees everything it once meant. Savannah, the old shop, his voice when he promised she would never feel small in his world, the warmth of his hand over hers on winter mornings, the life she thought was solid. She slides the ring off and closes it in her fist so tightly the metal bites into her skin. A sharp breath leaves her, not because she wants to keep it, because she refuses to let him decide when this marriage ends. She leaves before the bedroom door opens. The penthouse elevator drops in silence, floor by floor, while Chicago glows cold and distant through the glass. Avalise stands with one hand on the suitcase handle and the other curled around the ring now back on her finger, not out of hope, but out of choice. He will not dismiss her in whispers. He will not close this chapter for her. She will decide what comes off, what remains, and what survives. By the time the sun begins to edge the sky, she is gone. Gone from the glass tower, gone from the bed they shared, gone from the life she entered with trust and tenderness. Yet one truth remains buried under all the pain. She did not hear everything. She heard enough to break her heart, but not enough to reveal the full shape of what was happening. That is why you need to stay with this story. Because this is not only about betrayal, it is about silence, dignity, love handled the wrong way, and a woman who refused to let heartbreak define her ending. So tell me this in the comments. Would you have stayed to hear the full truth, or walked away that same night? And if you love deep, emotional stories with strong life lessons, like, share, and subscribe. At Odessa's door in Savannah, Avalise barely lifts her hand to knock. Odessa opens it, takes one look at her face, and says nothing. She only steps aside and lets her in. Long before Chicago glass towers, private elevators, and polished last names, Avalise Wren belonged to a quieter world. She grew up above a small antique restoration shop on a shaded street in Savannah, where the mornings carried the scent of cedar dust, warm varnish, old books, and sea air drifting in from farther out. The building itself looked modest from the outside, with pale worn brick, narrow front windows, and a painted wooden sign that had been touched up so many times it held the history of 3 generations in its brushstrokes. To strangers, it was simply an old shop, with old things inside. To Avalise, it was the first place that taught her how beauty survives time. Downstairs, every corner held a piece of someone else's past. Faded armchairs with hand-carved legs, tea carts with chipped wheels, vanity mirrors clouded by age, dining tables marked by long years of family dinners, arguments, birthdays, and grief. Nothing arrived perfect. That was the point. People brought in pieces that looked worn beyond saving, yet the shop treated each one with care, as if damage never erased value. Upstairs, life stayed simple. Avalise's room had lace curtains, polished floorboards, and shelves lined with novels, repair manuals, and sketchbooks filled with her careful handwriting. The kitchen was small, the furniture mismatched, and the walls held framed photos of women in the family who had survived hard seasons without losing their softness. Money was never loose in that home. Comfort came in smaller forms: clean sheets, hot tea, respect, routine, work done well. Savannah shaped Avalise in ways wealth never could. The city moved with memory. Its old houses stood with pride. Its iron balconies, hidden courtyards, and weathered porches seemed to say that age was not shameful. The place carried grace without noise. That quiet elegance settled into her early. She learned to speak with care, dress with simplicity, and carry herself with a kind of calm that did not beg to be noticed. She spent much of her childhood downstairs, seated on a stool near the workshop table, watching hands move with purpose. She learned the language of wood grain before she learned how to impress anyone. She saw that broken things were not ugly. They were unfinished stories waiting for patience. That belief became the center of her. Avalise did not learn restoration from a textbook first. She learned it from her grandmother's hands. Her grandmother, Celestine Wren, moved through the shop with steady grace. She never hurried for appearance. She never raised her voice to prove strength. She believed rushed work left a wound behind, even when the surface looked smooth. When customers came in with broken furniture and anxious faces, Celestine would run her fingertips along the wood, study the joints, check the grain, and pause long enough to understand what the piece needed. Only after that quiet study would she speak. She taught Avalise the same way. "Do not force old wood to become something else," she would say, placing a small sanding block into her granddaughter's hand. "Respect what it has carried." At first, Avalise wanted speed. As a child, she loved the final reveal, the shine, the moment a damaged table looked beautiful again. Celestine always drew her back to the middle, where the real work lived. She taught her how to strip old polish without scraping away history. She taught her how to repair a crack without pretending it never existed. She taught her to notice the quiet truths others missed: warped legs, weak joints, hidden stains, damage beneath glossy finish. Yet the lessons were never only about furniture. When a wealthy client once spoke down to them, using a tone that treated the shop like a service corner beneath notice, Avalise felt anger rise hot in her chest. Celestine stayed calm. She finished the conversation with perfect courtesy, then closed the ledger and said, "Dignity is not loud. It is the choice to remain whole in front of those who expect you to bend." That line stayed with Avalise for years. Her grandmother also taught her patience in ways that shaped her inner life. If glue needed a full day to set, they waited. If a finish required another coat, they gave it another coat. If a piece resisted repair, they did not punish it for being difficult. They studied it longer. Celestine believed impatience came from pride. People rushed when they wanted control more than truth. Under that guidance, Avalise grew into a woman who did not chase quick results, empty praise, or noisy attention. She learned that careful work carried honor. She learned that softness was not weakness. Most of all, she learned that what had been damaged still deserved respect. Some people entered the shop with tenderness. Others came in with dismissal already on their faces. Avalise noticed the difference early. There were customers who carried in old chairs, dressers, or cabinets as if they were carrying family. They spoke of mothers, grandfathers, weddings, and homes long sold. Those people never asked only what a piece was worth. They asked whether it could still remain itself after repair. But there were others who arrived with a shrug. They looked at scratched wood and saw inconvenience. They looked at faded fabric and saw something easier to replace than understand. More than once, Avalise watched people point at a table marked by decades of use and call it useless. She watched them laugh at old craftsmanship because it no longer looked fashionable. She watched them choose speed over meaning. That taught her something important. People often discard what asks for patience. One summer afternoon, a man brought in a narrow writing desk with a broken leg, chipped drawers, and water damage across the top. He wanted to know whether it was worth fixing. Celestine examined it quietly, then named a price that reflected the hours it would take. The man shook his head, said it was too much effort for a dead thing, and left it behind. He never returned. Avalise stood beside the desk after the door shut, staring at the stains and rough edges. "Maybe he's right," she said softly. "Maybe some pieces are too far gone." Celestine looked at her with calm disappointment, the kind that taught more than anger ever could. "Nothing with structure, history, and heart is too far gone because it has been neglected," she said. "The real question is whether someone is willing to do the work." Those words settled deep. Avalise spent weeks helping restore that desk. They rebuilt the broken leg, strengthened the drawer tracks, lifted the old finish, and brought the wood back to a soft, deep glow. When it was done, it did not look new. It looked honest, strong, worthy again. She understood something then that shaped her view of life itself. Damage can hide beauty from careless eyes, but it does not erase it. That belief changed how she looked at objects, people, and even herself. She stopped measuring worth by polish, status, or first impressions. She learned to trust quiet endurance. She learned to honor what had lasted, and she carried that lesson into every room she entered, long before love ever tested it. By the time Avalise reached her mid-20s, people in Savannah no longer saw her as Celestine Wren's granddaughter, standing near a workshop table. They saw her as a serious craftswoman with her own eye, her own standards, and her own name. That did not happen through noise or charm. It came through years of careful work. After Celestine passed, the shop felt different for a long while. The rooms still held the same scent of wood polish and old paper. The tools still sat in familiar places. The light still crossed the front windows in the same gentle pattern each morning. Yet grief changed the air. For a season, Avalise worked through sorrow with silent focus, opening the shop at the same hour, sweeping the floor before sunrise, checking orders, returning calls, and finishing each piece with the same discipline her grandmother had lived by. People expected softness from her because of her quiet voice and graceful manner. They often mistook calm for fragility. Avalise let them think so, until the work spoke. She developed a reputation for restraint. She never over-restored. She never stripped character from old furniture to chase a polished showroom look. Designers started noticing her because her pieces kept their soul. A chair still looked like it had lived. A cabinet still carried age with pride. A dining table still held the dignity of time instead of looking dipped in false perfection. Her client list grew slowly, then steadily. A local designer sent her one project, then 3 more. An old family referred her after she restored a damaged hope chest no one else wanted to touch. A boutique hotel owner hired her to revive a set of weathered lobby pieces, then recommended her to others. She built trust, one finished piece at a time. Avalise kept her standards high. She wrote careful estimates, met her deadlines, and refused work that demanded shortcuts. She trained no one until they learned patience first. She ran the shop with grace, yet there was steel under it. She did not beg for approval. She did not compete for attention. She let quality travel by word of mouth. That quiet discipline gave her something larger than income. It gave her independence. She was not waiting for rescue, marriage, or luck to build a meaningful life. She had already built one with her own hands. And by the time the right eyes from outside Georgia began to notice her, Avalise Wren was no longer a woman hoping to be chosen. She was a woman whose work made people come looking for her. The call came on an ordinary afternoon, which made it feel unreal at first. Avalise was at her work table, studying the curved edge of a damaged sideboard, when the shop phone rang. She wiped her hands on a clean cloth, crossed the room, and answered in her usual calm tone, expecting a local client, a delivery question, or a follow-up about an estimate. Instead, the voice on the line belonged to a project coordinator from a luxury hotel group based in Chicago. At first, Avalise thought there had been some mistake. The woman spoke with polished confidence and explained that one of their oldest landmark properties was entering a major restoration phase. The hotel's design team had reviewed several specialists across the country, but Avalise's name had come up more than once through private recommendations. They had seen her work on heritage pieces, followed the care in her finish choices, and admired the way she restored age without stripping identity. That last part caught her attention. Most high-end clients wanted old things to look expensive, not truthful. This call sounded different. She listened closely as details unfolded. The hotel had original woodwork, historic furniture pieces, damaged tables, antique mirrors, and decorative elements too valuable to replace carelessly. They needed someone with patience, technical skill, and respect for the building's past. They were prepared to cover travel, housing, and consultation fees. They wanted to know if she would consider leading the restoration of select interior pieces tied to the hotel's reopening plan. Avalise glanced around the shop while the woman spoke. Afternoon light touched the old shelves. A half-finished chair stood near the window. Her grandmother's tools rested where they always had. For a brief moment, the room seemed to hold its breath with her. Savannah had shaped her. The shop had built her. Yet this was the kind of opportunity that did not arrive twice for women who worked quietly and let others take the spotlight. She did not answer too quickly. She asked for the project files. She asked for photographs. She asked for the age of the building, the restoration timeline, the level of structural damage, and the decision-making chain behind approvals. By the end of the call, the woman on the other end sounded impressed rather than surprised. When Avalise finally set the receiver down, she stood still for a moment, not with fear, but with the steady awareness that life had just opened a new door. Chicago was waiting, and somewhere inside that great old hotel stood a ruined walnut table, a guarded man, and the beginning of everything that would change her life. In Chicago, Zevran Holloway moved through rooms the way sharp weather moves through glass. People felt him before he reached them. He was the kind of man whose presence changed posture. Executives straightened when he entered. Assistants checked their notes twice. Investors listened more carefully when he spoke, because he had built a reputation on being right more often than other powerful men could bear. He did not waste words, and he did not soften truths to protect weak preparation. If a proposal lacked depth, he dismissed it in minutes. If a partner arrived unprepared, the meeting ended before excuses could begin. In business circles, his standards were famous. So was the silence that followed when he was disappointed. The magazines liked to describe him with clean, hard phrases: controlled, brilliant, untouchable. He wore custom suits that fit him with exact precision, dark coats in winter, and cufflinks so understated they looked expensive only to those who understood such things. His public image was flawless. No careless scandals, no loud nightlife, no sloppy interviews. He kept his body disciplined, his schedule exact, and his expression guarded enough that no camera ever caught too much. Yet none of that was what made him feared. It was the way he seemed untouched by emotion when others were ruled by it. A hotel manager once lost a contract after hiding a cost overrun deep in a report, hoping the detail would go unnoticed, until later, Zevran found it in under 10 minutes. He said nothing for a full 5 seconds after reading the page. That silence shook the room more than shouting would have. When he finally looked up, his voice stayed level. "You knew this was there." The manager tried to explain. Zevran did not raise his tone. He only closed the file, slid it across the table, and said, "You can lie once in this business. After that, you do not work near me again." That was how he handled failure. Cleanly, calmly, without visible anger, without mercy. To the world, it looked like strength in its purest form. To those who worked closest to him, it looked like a man who had learned to lock every feeling behind polished control. He gave respect when it was earned. He gave trust slowly. He gave almost nothing of himself for free. Zevran was not born cold. He was trained into it. The Holloway family did not believe softness helped anyone survive. In their world, control came first. Composure came next. Feeling, if it had any place at all, belonged in private, and only for a moment. By the time Zevran was old enough to understand the shape of his last name, he already knew 2 rules without anyone needing to repeat them often. Never show uncertainty. Never let anyone see what hurts you. The Holloways called it strength. They called it discipline. They called it preparation for the weight of legacy. But to a boy growing up inside that house, it often felt like being loved only when he performed well enough to deserve air. The family home itself reflected the lesson. It was beautiful in the way expensive spaces often are. Stone floors, dark wood, tall windows, polished surfaces, perfect lighting, but it held no warmth that arrived on its own. Nothing was left out carelessly. Nothing looked lived in. Staff moved quietly. Meals were formal even when only family sat at the table. Conversations stayed measured. A laugh that grew too free could bring a glance sharp enough to shut it down. As a child, Zevran learned quickly that emotion changed the temperature of a room in ways his parents disliked. If he spoke too excitedly, his father corrected his tone. If he asked too many questions, his mother reminded him that refinement meant restraint. If disappointment showed on his face, he was told to master himself before the world mastered him first. Tenderness did appear sometimes, but never without condition attached to it. Praise followed achievement. Approval followed control. Affection arrived after performance. It was never offered as a steady shelter. It was handed out like a reward. So Zevran adapted the way intelligent children often do. He studied the system and became excellent inside it. He learned how to hold eye contact without looking needy. He learned how to keep his voice even when frustrated. He learned how to think 3 moves ahead so nothing could catch him exposed. He learned that if he handled every problem before it reached the family publicly, he earned a little more room to breathe. By the time he reached manhood, control no longer felt like a strategy. It felt like identity. He did not know how to love without managing risk around it. He did not know how to fear loss without tightening his grip. And because no one had taught him that truth could sit beside tenderness, he grew into a man who often chose control first, even when love stood right in front of him asking for something gentler. Inside the Holloway family, image was never treated as a small matter. It was treated as duty. Zevran's father, Alric Holloway, believed reputation was the first wall between power and ruin. He spoke often about legacy, but rarely about peace. To him, the family name was not something to carry with gratitude. It was something to defend at all times. He watched markets the way other men watched storms. He judged people fast, remembered weakness longer than kindness, and measured nearly every choice by one question. Does this protect the family or expose it? His mother, Merith, handled a different side of the same pressure. She watched appearances with almost artistic discipline. She noticed posture, wording, dinner seating, facial expression, and the kind of silence people left behind after a conversation. She believed the right family did not merely succeed, it looked untouchable while succeeding. To Merith, feelings were not denied because they did not exist. They were denied because they ruined presentation. Together, his parents created a house where failure felt larger than life. A poor grade brought disappointment sharpened into quiet contempt. A wrong choice in public meant lectures afterward about embarrassment. If Zevran excelled, approval arrived dressed in polished language. Well done. As expected, you represented the family properly. But the warmth never lasted beyond the success itself. It never settled into his bones as security. He learned this lesson young. Once, after winning a school award, he came home carrying the certificate with the open pride of a child who still hoped joy might be met with joy. His father nodded once, set the paper down, and asked what came next. His mother adjusted his collar for a dinner guest arriving that evening and reminded him not to look too pleased with himself. The moment passed before he had fully held it. On the rare nights he fell short, the house became colder. No shouting was needed. Silence did the work. Doors closed softer than usual. Meals shortened. Staff kept their eyes lowered. His parents knew how to make disappointment feel like distance. Over time, Zevran stopped seeking affection in its pure form because he no longer believed it came that way. Love, in the world that raised him, had to be earned, maintained, and protected through flawless control. That belief made him strong in public. It also left him deeply unprepared for the kind of love that asked for honesty, trust, and emotional presence instead of performance. From the outside, Zevran Holloway looked like a man who had everything arranged in his favor. He had wealth, influence, discipline, and the kind of authority that made people step aside without being asked twice. His name carried weight in rooms where fortunes shifted over lunch. His signature could open projects, end careers, and move millions before sunset. Men older than him watched his decisions. Women in public circles studied him with quiet interest. Journalists wrote about his focus with a mix of admiration and caution. To anyone standing far enough away, his life looked complete. It was not. Success filled his calendar, not his silence. Most nights ended the same way. A driver took him home late. The elevator rose through a building filled with expensive stillness. The penthouse doors opened to perfect furniture, clean lines, low light, and rooms that never argued with him because no real life happened inside them. He would loosen his tie, pour a drink he barely tasted, and stand at the windows looking down at a city that glittered as if it owed him comfort. It never gave him any. He was surrounded by people, yet untouched by closeness. Executives needed his approval. Investors needed his confidence. Staff needed his decisions. His parents needed his control. Friends were few, and even those who had known him for years understood there were doors inside him that stayed locked no matter how long they remained near. Tavian Crest came closest to understanding the shape of that distance, but even Tavian knew better than to pry when Zevran retreated behind silence. There were moments when the emptiness showed itself more clearly than he wanted. A business dinner would end, and laughter from another table, some small, ordinary family moment, would catch his attention harder than any market report. He would walk past hotel suites designed for warmth and rest, then return to a home that held neither. Even victory lost its taste quickly. A successful deal brought applause, handshakes, and articles by morning, yet by night he was left with the same quiet ache he never named. He had mastered command, but not peace. That was the hidden cost of becoming the man everyone trusted to stay composed. He knew how to hold power. He knew how to solve problems. He knew how to remain standing while pressure closed in. He did not know how to be deeply known and still feel safe. The first time Zevran saw Avalise Wren, the hotel around them was still half dust, half promise. The landmark property stood in the middle of Chicago like a proud old woman refusing to bow to time. Scaffolding covered parts of the exterior. Inside, the grand ballroom sat under layers of work. Chandeliers had been lowered in pieces. Protective sheets covered parts of the marble floor. The air smelled of plaster, sawdust, polish, and fresh plans being forced into old walls. Contractors moved in steady patterns. Designers spoke over samples and sketches. Everyone worked with one eye on deadlines and the other on Zevran Holloway's standards. He walked through the ballroom with the same exact control he carried everywhere. Dark coat buttoned, hands empty, eyes alert. He did not need to announce himself. The room shifted when he entered. Conversations lowered. A site manager straightened a stack of documents that had already been straight. No one wanted to be the person who looked careless in front of him. But Zevran's attention did not stay on the staff for long. Near the far side of the room stood a damaged walnut table pulled away from the rest of the furniture set aside for assessment. Its surface had deep scratches. One edge was split. Time and neglect had left it dulled and uneven. Most people had already written it off as decorative salvage at best. Avalise stood beside it with her sleeves folded back, one hand resting lightly near the cracked edge, her focus so complete she did not notice him approach at first. She was not dressed to impress anyone. Simple blouse, fitted trousers, hair pinned up with a few loose strands falling near her cheek. No effort wasted on performance, yet something about her steadiness caught him more sharply than beauty alone could have. She looked at the ruined table the way most people looked at something worth protecting. When she finally sensed him and turned, Zevran met calm eyes instead of nervousness. He glanced at the table. Can it still be saved? Most people answered him too quickly. They rushed to sound confident. Avalise did not. She looked back at the damaged wood, studied it one more second, and said, "Yes, if nobody rushes me." A faint stillness passed between them. No apology in her tone, no attempt to flatter him, only honesty. Zevran held her gaze a moment longer than he meant to. "Then nobody will," he said. It was a short exchange, barely enough to register as important to anyone watching. Yet, something shifted in him at that table. For the first time in a long while, he met someone who did not seem impressed by his power, intimidated by his silence, or eager to please him at the cost of truth. Avalise spoke to him as if the work mattered more than his name. He respected that at once. The days inside the hotel settled into a rhythm that belonged to work first, yet something quieter began growing beneath it. Avalise spent her mornings moving from room to room with sketches, fabric notes, finished samples, and a level of focus that made people leave her space once they understood she did not work well around noise for its own sake. She studied damaged woodwork, checked old joints, ran her fingers across carved edges, and made decisions with care that frustrated anyone who wanted speed over substance. The crews learned fast that she was polite, never weak. If a foreman tried to push her timeline, she answered with calm facts. If a designer suggested replacing pieces she knew could be restored, she explained exactly why that would strip the hotel of its history. Zevran watched more than he spoke. At first, their contact stayed practical. He asked for updates. She gave them. He reviewed budgets. She defended what required more time. He expected precision, and she met him with it. Yet unlike others around him, Avalise never performed for his approval. She did not brighten her voice because he entered a room. She did not soften her opinions to keep him comfortable. That alone made him return to her work areas more often than he needed to. Soon, their conversations stretched past deadlines and furniture reports. Sometimes he appeared near the ballroom at the end of the day, long after most executives had left, asking how the restoration was moving. Avalise would answer without looking up at first, still focused on a surface she was cleaning or a finish she was testing. He would stand near enough to show interest, far enough not to crowd her. Slowly, work talk began opening into something else. He asked why she rejected certain varnishes. She explained how shine could ruin old wood by making it look false. He asked why age mattered so much to her. She told him some things deserved to look lived, not erased. Those late hours changed the air between them. The hotel itself seemed softer after the crews left. Tools rested. Plastic coverings barely moved in the low current from the vents. City light spilled through tall windows and touched dust in the air like fine gold. In that quiet, Zevran became less like the man people feared in meetings. Avalise noticed it in the way his shoulders lowered after dark, in the way his voice lost some of its steel, in the way he lingered when he could have gone home. Neither of them named the shift yet. Still, something had begun. Work brought them into the same rooms. Silence kept finding reasons to hold them there a little longer. What unsettled Avalise most was not Zevran's wealth, his discipline, or the way everyone around him changed when he entered a room. It was his attention. Many men with power knew how to ask questions that sounded thoughtful while waiting only for their turn to speak. Zevran did something rarer. He asked, then stayed quiet long enough for the answer to matter. The first time she noticed it clearly, they were standing in one of the smaller reception rooms on the third floor. Avalise had been reviewing a damaged console table placed against the wall beneath an old gilt mirror. The room still smelled faintly of plaster and old smoke trapped in wood from years the building had outlived. Zevran came in with a folder in hand, asked a brief question about scheduling, then paused when he saw her studying the table's carved apron. Why restoration? He asked. Avalise looked up, half expecting the question to be casual, the kind people use to fill silence. Instead, he held her gaze with full focus, as if the answer might tell him something worth carrying. She rested the folder of finish notes against her hip. Because replacement is easy, she said. Care takes more character. He did not smile. He rarely did. Yet something in his expression shifted, as though the line had reached a place inside him he did not usually leave open. Most people would have moved on there. Zevran did not. What made you stay with it? He asked. A trade like this asks for patience. People do not seem to value much anymore. Avalise considered him for a second before answering. My grandmother taught me that damage is not the end of a story. Only neglect is. I believed her. He took that in without interrupting. Later that evening, he found her again near the service corridor, where workers had left stacked crates and rolled carpeting against the walls. He held 2 takeaway coffees, handed her one, and asked what Savannah had been like to grow up in, not in the shallow way outsiders asked about charming cities. He wanted texture, daily life, the shop, her grandmother, the smell of the workroom in summer. What kind of people brought furniture in? What kind of child she had been before discipline shaped her into the woman standing before him? She answered more than she meant to, not because he charmed her, because he listened with care that felt almost startling in a man known for cutting through others without mercy. He remembered details. He asked follow-up questions tied to what she had said before. He did not drift. He did not reach for his phone. He did not turn her words into a doorway back to himself. For Avalise, that kind of listening carried danger of its own. It made a guarded man feel less guarded. The more time Avalise spent around Zevran, the less convincing his perfection became. To the rest of the hotel staff, he remained exact, polished, and difficult to read. He arrived in dark coats, gave brief instructions, corrected mistakes without raising his voice, and left rooms carrying the same hard control that had built his name into something people respected and feared. From a distance, he looked untouched by strain, like a man shaped from discipline alone. Up close, the truth sat in smaller places. Avalise noticed it first in his pauses. There were moments, usually late in the evening, when he would stop speaking for a beat too long, as if his thoughts had moved somewhere heavier than the room around them. She saw it in the way his fingers loosened at his cuffs after long meetings, in the faint pressure he pressed into the back of his neck when he thought no one watched, in the quiet exhale that left him whenever the last contractor stepped away and the hotel gave him a few breaths without demands. One night, she found him standing alone near a row of uncovered windows on the upper floor. The city spread beneath them in silver light and moving traffic, full of energy that looked almost distant from where they stood. He had loosened his tie. His jacket hung open. For the first time since she met him, he looked less like a public figure and more like a man who had reached the end of a long day without finding rest at the other side of it. You look tired, she said, before she could decide whether to soften the truth. Most people would have denied it. Zevran only glanced at her with a faint expression she had not seen before. Not quite surprise, not quite relief. More like he was unused to someone saying what they saw without trying to polish it first. I am, he said. That answer stayed with her. Not because it was dramatic, because it was honest. From that point, she started seeing more of him than she suspected he meant to reveal. The controlled man was still there, yet beneath him lived someone carrying too much for too long. A loneliness sat around him even in crowded rooms. It showed in how quickly he returned to work after silence. It showed in how rarely he looked fully at ease, unless they were speaking without witnesses nearby. Avalise had met polished men before, men who wore confidence like a uniform. Zevran was different. His control did not come from vanity. It came from old habit, old pressure, and an exhaustion he hid so well that most people mistook it for strength alone. She did not pity him. She understood him a little more. Attraction did not arrive between them in a loud, dramatic rush. It built itself in the kind of moments most people would miss if they were only looking for spectacle. It began with coffee. One late afternoon, after a brutal round of meetings with contractors and designers who kept pushing speed over care, Avalise returned to the ballroom ready to work in silence for the rest of the day. A paper cup already sat on the edge of the long table beside her notes. No name on it, no card, no flowers attached to turn the gesture into a performance. Just coffee made exactly the way she liked it. Dark, no sugar, a little cream. She looked up and found Zevran at the far end of the room, reviewing a file as if the cup had nothing to do with him. "You remembered," she said. He barely lifted his eyes. "You complain less when you've had it." Avalise almost smiled. Almost. From there, the small moments gathered weight. They crossed paths in empty hallways after most of the building had gone quiet, and what began as short updates turned into pauses neither of them seemed eager to end. She would lean against a wall with a pencil tucked behind one ear, explaining why a certain finish needed another coat. He would listen with his hands in his coat pockets, asking the kind of follow-up questions that proved he had been paying attention days earlier. Sometimes their shoulders nearly brushed as they studied old molding or looked over fabric samples under poor temporary lighting. Neither stepped away too quickly. The hotel kitchen became another place where the distance between them thinned. One night, long after the official workday had ended, Avalise found Zevran standing near the prep counter while one of the overnight kitchen staff reheated leftover peach pie from a trial menu. He looked slightly out of place in that industrial space, dressed in a tailored shirt with the top button open, jacket set aside, sleeves folded with more fatigue than elegance. He handed her a paper plate without ceremony. "Do all billionaires lure contractors into kitchens this late?" she asked. "Only the ones trying to learn why a woman from Savannah talks about wood finish like it matters more than money." She took the plate. "Some things do." That answer changed his face, not into a smile exactly, but into something warmer than his usual restraint. They stayed there longer than the pie required, speaking about small things that turned personal without either of them forcing it. Her grandmother's shop, his dislike of empty praise, the difference between a house and a home, why old things felt more trustworthy than new ones. The hours slipped past quietly, and when Avalise returned to her room that night, she carried more than tiredness with her. She carried the first clear knowledge that being near him had started to matter. The night it happened, the hotel had fallen into one of those rare quiet hours that felt borrowed from the world outside time. Most of the crew had gone. The clatter of tools was gone too. Plastic coverings rested still. The long hallways held only low work lights and the distant hum of elevators somewhere deeper in the building. Avalise was in the unfinished grand suite on the top floor, checking the condition of two antique bedside tables that had been brought up earlier for review. The room was still far from complete. Drop cloths covered part of the floor. One wall waited for its final finish. Bare bulbs had been replaced by temporary lamps, and through the tall uncovered windows, Chicago shone in soft bands of gold and white. She heard Zevran before she turned, not his voice, this time. His steps, measured, familiar. He stopped near the doorway, not close enough to crowd her, only close enough to share the same hush. "You're still working," he said. "So are you." A faint look passed across his face. "I was looking for you." The honesty in that line changed the air at once. Avalise set the small notebook in her hand down on the table beside her. "That sounds dangerous." "For who?" "For the man who keeps asking questions he seems to remember too well." His eyes held hers. "And for the woman who answers them." For a moment, neither moved. The city lights filled the silence between them, and the half-finished room seemed to hold its breath. Avalise became aware of everything at once. The slight tiredness in his eyes, the loosened line of his collar, the warmth gathering low in her chest, the simple fact that she felt safer with him in unfinished spaces than most people ever felt in completed homes. Zevran stepped closer, slowly enough to leave her room to stop him. He lifted one hand, then paused near her face instead of touching her. That pause mattered. It told her this was not hunger without thought. It was care waiting for permission. Avalise answered by closing the distance herself. His mouth met hers with a tenderness that startled her. No force, no display, only a slow, careful kiss that felt less like taking and more like asking. She felt his restraint, his want, his quiet disbelief that this was happening, all folded into that single moment. Her hand rose to his chest, and beneath her palm his heartbeat was steady, then not steady at all. When they finally pulled apart, the room looked the same, yet nothing inside it felt unchanged. By the time Zevran asked Avalise to marry him, Savannah no longer felt like a place he visited only to see her. It had started to work on him in quieter ways. The city slowed him down. The air smelled different there. The streets did not rush to impress anyone. Even the light seemed softer, especially in the late afternoon when the old buildings caught gold along their edges and the trees cast calm shade across the sidewalks. In Chicago, Zevran moved through pressure from the moment his eyes opened. In Savannah, something in him loosened. Not all the way. A man raised like him did not lay down control with ease. Still, Avalise saw the change. His shoulders sat lower. His voice lost some of its hard edge. He listened more. He stayed present longer. She took him to her grandmother's old shop one evening after closing. The front sign had been repainted, yet the place still carried Celestine's spirit in every corner. The shelves held jars of hardware sorted by size. The old stool by the window remained where it had always been. A folded cloth sat near the workbench. Tools rested in clean order. The room felt simple, steady, and full of care. To Avalise, it was sacred ground. Zevran stood inside with unusual stillness, taking in the details without comment at first. His fingers brushed the edge of the work table, as if he understood he was touching more than wood. Avalise watched him from a few feet away, her heart strangely unguarded. "My grandmother would have liked you some days," she said. He glanced back at her. "Only some. She had strong standards. So do you." The line made her smile. For a moment, neither spoke. Evening light rested across the floorboards. Outside, the street had gone quiet. Inside, the air held memory, love, and the kind of peace money could never buy. Then Zevran stepped toward her. There was no crowd, no dinner party, no camera waiting to capture the moment. He did not reach for grand display because by then he knew Avalise well enough to understand what would matter. He looked around the shop once more, then back at her, and when he spoke, his voice held something she had rarely heard from him so openly. "I know my world is louder than yours," he said. "I know it is colder too. But when I am with you, life feels honest in a way I did not know I was missing. I do not want to offer you a polished promise and fail you later. I want to build something worthy of you. A real home, a real life. Marry me, Avalise." She felt tears press hot behind her eyes before she could stop them. Not because he sounded perfect, because in that moment, he sounded true. The first months of marriage felt nothing like the world expected from a man like Zevran Holloway. People on the outside imagined luxury first: glass walls, expensive wine, polished events, perfect photographs in society pages. Those things existed, of course. The penthouse sat high above Chicago with wide windows, stone floors, clean lines, and views that stretched across the city like a private kingdom. Yet the life Avalise and Zevran built inside it was gentler than the image attached to his name. Their real marriage lived in small hours. It lived in winter mornings before meetings and phone calls took him away. Avalise would wake to pale light reaching across the bed and find Zevran half-dressed for work, knotting his tie in the mirror. He always looked sharp before leaving. Yet with her, he allowed quieter habits to show. He would cross back to the bed, bend, and press his lips to her temple or the edge of her cheek, as if that touch mattered more than the full day waiting for him. Sometimes she would catch his wrist before he moved away, and he would stay an extra minute, seated beside her, one hand resting over hers in the blankets, saying nothing because nothing needed saying. It lived in the kitchen too. Some nights he came home later than she liked, yet earlier than anyone around him expected. He would loosen his collar, set his phone face down, and find her barefoot near the stove, or leaning against the counter with music low in the background. Those evenings became theirs. She would taste a sauce and hold out the spoon for him without ceremony. He would stand too close on purpose. Once, while pasta boiled and rain pressed softly against the windows, he placed one hand at her waist and turned her away from the stove. "There is food on the fire," she murmured. "It will survive." Then he drew her into a slow dance right there in the kitchen. No audience, no polished line, only warmth, laughter, and the sort of still happiness neither of them had expected to need so badly. Their tenderness stayed private in other ways too, Avalise reading with her head on his chest while he traced idle circles against her wrist, Zevran resting more deeply with her beside him than he ever had alone. Quiet talks in dim rooms after midnight, when his guard dropped and her voice softened the sharp corners of his day. In those first months, love did not feel loud. It felt safe. When Avalise first stepped into the penthouse as Zevran's wife, she understood at once why the place had never given him rest. It was stunning, yet empty, in the way expensive spaces often are, when no heart has settled inside them. The ceilings were high. The windows stretched wide across the skyline. Stone, glass, steel, and sharp design choices made every room look polished enough for a magazine spread. Nothing clashed. Nothing felt careless. Everything stood in its place with clean perfection. Yet, it did not feel lived in. It felt arranged. The space held comfort without warmth, beauty without softness, wealth without memory. It looked like a place built to impress guests who never stayed long enough to notice what was missing. There were no books stacked where someone had left off reading, no lamp chosen for evening calm rather than design approval, no small objects carrying history, no sign that anyone inside those walls had ever let themselves belong fully. Avalise noticed that before she unpacked a single box. She did not attack the place with noise or force. She changed it the same way she restored old furniture, with care, with patience, and with respect for what already existed beneath the surface. She began with light. Cold overhead brightness gave way to warm lamps placed in corners where evening could soften the room. Then came texture. Throws over the sofa. Cushions that invited rest instead of posture. Curtains with depth instead of severe lines. She brought in books, framed sketches, bowls of lemons in the kitchen, candles that carried cedar and citrus, and old wooden pieces with visible age that broke the hard perfection of the penthouse in the best way. She added music too, low jazz in the mornings, instrumentals in the evenings, soft sound filling rooms that had once echoed with nothing but silence and distant city noise. The kitchen changed next. What had looked like a showroom slowly became a place where meals happened, where fruit sat in a bowl because it was meant to be eaten, where herbs grew near the window, where a mug might be left near the sink because someone had been there and planned to return. Zevran noticed every shift, even when he pretended not to at first. He came home one evening, loosened his tie near the door, and stopped when he saw the living room lit in amber instead of white. A book lay open on the table. Music moved low through the air. Avalise sat curled into one corner of the sofa with her legs tucked beneath her, reading as if she had always belonged there. "This place looks different," he said. She glanced up. "It feels different, too." He stood still for a second, studying the room, then her, and something quiet passed over his face. Not surprise alone, relief. That was the true change Avalise brought into his life. She did not simply decorate rooms. She gave them spirit. She turned height into shelter. She turned polish into peace. She turned the penthouse from a symbol of success into a place where a man could finally exhale. The first time Avalise met Merith Holloway as Zevran's wife, she understood within minutes that some women never need to raise their voices to wound. Merith was elegance shaped into discipline. She dressed with perfect restraint, spoke with calm control, and carried herself like a woman who believed the world existed to confirm her standards. Nothing about her looked careless. Her smile was measured. Her posture remained flawless. Even her pauses felt deliberate, as though she had spent years learning how to make silence serve her better than open dislike ever could. She welcomed Avalise with all the right words. "You look lovely, dear. It is good to finally have you with us. We have heard so much." Every line sounded proper. None of them felt warm. At first, Avalise told herself not to judge too quickly. Families were complicated. Wealth often trained people into formality. A mother protective of her son might need time. She entered the Holloway circle with grace, not defensiveness. She dressed simply but beautifully. She spoke with care. She refused to act intimidated by rooms built to make outsiders feel smaller. Still, Meredith kept finding ways to remind her where she stood in that world. It happened in dining rooms, charity events, and private sitting areas where conversation looked harmless to anyone not listening closely. Avalise would mention a restoration project, and Meredith would smile faintly before asking whether hands-on work had been difficult to leave behind now that her life had changed. A guest would praise Avalise's calm taste, and Meredith would respond with something smooth about simplicity often being charming when worn with confidence. The cuts stayed soft enough to deny. That was what made them dangerous. One evening at a family dinner, while crystal caught candlelight and every plate looked arranged for approval, Meredith turned to Avalise with that same polished expression. "You are lovely, dear," she said, lifting her glass, "though this world can be hard on women who mistake warmth for readiness." The table stayed quiet. Avalise felt the meaning at once, not subtle enough to miss, not direct enough to challenge, without becoming the one who looked oversensitive. So she answered, with composure Celestine would have been proud of, "Then it is fortunate I was raised to know the difference between softness and weakness." For the first time, Meredith's smile tightened. Zevran heard it. He saw it too. Avalise knew that much from the brief stillness that crossed his face. Yet he let the dinner continue. He did not cut in, he did not draw a line. Later, in private, he would say he noticed, he would say his mother had gone too far. He would say he would handle it. Avalise accepted the apology that night. Still, something small and unwelcome settled in her chest. After that dinner, Avalise started noticing a pattern she could not ignore. Meredith never pushed hard enough to create a public scene. She preferred precision over open attack. A remark at brunch, a glance at a gala, a polished sentence placed so neatly inside a conversation that anyone outside the marriage would miss the wound and only hear elegance. Each time, Avalise held her dignity. Each time, Zevran noticed. Each time, he waited until they were alone to admit his mother had crossed a line. That was the part that started wearing on her. Not only Meredith's disdain, but Zevran's private honesty and public restraint. One evening, after a foundation event filled with diamonds, camera flashes, and the kind of smiles people practice before mirrors, they stepped into the back of the car for the ride home. The city lights moved across the windows in broken patterns. Avalise sat angled toward the door, quiet in a way that made the silence feel heavier than anger. Zevran loosened his cuff and looked at her. "My mother was out of line tonight." Avalise turned slowly. "Tonight?" He held her gaze, already aware of what she meant. "At dinner last week," she said. "At the luncheon before that. In your family's sitting room when she asked whether I found formal conversation tiring after working with my hands for so many years." "You hear all of it, Zevran." "I do." "Then why do you only find your voice when no one else is listening?" The question sat between them, with nowhere to hide. Zevran exhaled, tiredness pressing into his features. "Because making a scene with her in public only feeds her. Let me handle it." There it was again. That line, smooth, controlled, infuriating. Avalise looked out at the passing streets, her throat tight with a disappointment she did not want to name too early. He was not cruel. That made it worse. A cruel man would be easier to fight. Zevran loved her. She knew he did. Yet he kept choosing order over clarity, management over defense, private comfort over public loyalty. He acted as though love could stay strong on closed-door apologies, while disrespect kept drawing breath in front of witnesses. By the time they reached home, the evening had settled into a silence that felt too familiar. So let me ask you this. Does love still feel safe when one person keeps saying, "Let me handle it," while the wound keeps happening in plain sight? Tell me in the comments what the first warning sign was for you. Was it Meredith's words, or Zevran's silence when it mattered most? The trouble did not begin with Zevran. It began years before he ever took full control of the Holloway empire, inside decisions made by a father who cared more about preserving power than protecting truth. For a long time, the family hotels looked strong from the outside. Occupancy stayed high. Investors stayed calm. Expansion plans moved forward with polished confidence. The Holloway name still carried its old shine in business circles, and most people assumed the company stood on solid ground, because it always had. What few people knew was that some of that strength had been staged through complicated financial structures designed to hide losses until they could be buried under future success. Ulrich Holloway had built part of his reputation on appearing unshakable. He hated public weakness, hated numbers that suggested decline, hated anything that might give rivals a reason to circle. So when several past investments began to sour, he did not report the damage cleanly. He buried pieces of it inside shell partnerships and layered deals that shifted risk into corners hard for outsiders to read at first glance. On paper, the company still looked stable. In truth, weak ground had been covered with expensive flooring. Zevran discovered the full depth of that damage only after his father's health began failing and old files started crossing his desk without the usual filters. He spent years quietly cleaning up what he could, untangling one bad structure after another, selling off dead weight, strengthening weakened divisions, and making decisions harsh enough to save the company from collapse. Most of the world praised his sharp leadership without knowing how much of his work involved repairing what another man had hidden. The problem was that buried damage rarely stays buried forever. 6 months into his marriage, an external audit pressed deeper than expected. A routine review became something far more dangerous. Questions started surfacing about legacy holdings, old transfers, and irregular partnerships tied to years before Zevran's leadership. The legal team used careful language, yet the meaning was clear. If the auditors kept pulling at the right threads, the family would face exposure, financial fallout, and public scrutiny strong enough to stain every part of the brand. For Zevran, the threat was larger than money. It was his father's shadow reaching into his marriage, his future, and the one part of his life that had begun to feel clean. Once the audit began pressing against old family secrets, Meredith Holloway responded the only way she knew how. She reached for image. She did not speak about fear in open terms. She did not sit down with Zevran and ask what the family had truly done, or what the cost of past deception might be. Women like Meredith did not move toward the messy center of a problem. They moved toward presentation, toward angles, toward what needed to be seen, hidden, softened, or controlled before the rest of the world noticed the crack. Within days, her calendar changed. Private lunches with long-time donors appeared. Foundation meetings were suddenly framed as important family appearances. Invitations that might once have been optional became expected. She began calling the penthouse more often, always with perfect timing, always with a voice smooth enough to sound caring while carrying instruction beneath every word. Avalise should be seen beside you this month. We must keep things steady in public. People read too much into absence. None of it sounded cruel by itself. That was Meredith's gift. She could dress pressure as wisdom and make manipulation sound like grace. Avalise felt it tightening around her, even before she understood the full shape of the audit. Dresses were selected with more scrutiny than before. Seating charts at events suddenly mattered in ways they had not a few months earlier. Meredith corrected tiny things with quiet precision, the cut of a sleeve, the tone of an answer, whether Avalise smiled enough at the right table, whether she looked too thoughtful when photographed. It was never about helping her. It was about using her presence as part of the family's polished shield. One afternoon, at a charity planning session filled with cream flowers and women who measured one another through polished courtesy, Meredith drew Avalise aside near the refreshments table. "You must understand," she said gently, adjusting the edge of Avalise's cuff. "Without permission, this family is watched more closely in difficult seasons. A wife carries more than her own feelings at times like this." Avalise met her gaze. "Does a wife also get the truth at times like this?" Meredith's hand stilled for only a second. Then the polished smile returned. "Truth is rarely useful in raw form, dear. Stability matters more." That answer settled in Avalise's chest like a stone, because it told her something larger than Meredith likely intended. In the Holloway world, comfort came after image, clarity came after control. Human cost mattered less than appearances holding together one more day. And as pressure rose, Meredith made one thing painfully clear without saying it outright. She did not see Avalise as family. She saw her as a piece to position. At first, Avalise tried to treat the shift in Zevran as pressure, not distance. She knew the weight he carried. She knew his work did not leave him much room to breathe, even in calmer seasons. She had seen the tiredness in him long before marriage, had seen how easily responsibility settled across his shoulders and stayed there like stone. So when the first dinner ran late, she let it pass. When the second evening ended with a short message and no real explanation, she told herself not to make too much of it. Marriage asked for grace. Love asked for patience. She gave him both. Still, patterns have a way of turning patience into ache. Their dinners had once been one of the steadiest parts of their life. Even on long days, Zevran usually found his way back to the table, even if only for half an hour, tie loosened, phone set aside, shoulders slowly dropping as Avalise pulled him out of the pace of business and into something more human. Those meals had meant more than food. They had been proof that their life together stood apart from the machinery of his name. Now the table stayed set too long. The candles burned low for no reason. Soup cooled untouched. A plate waited across from her in clean silence. Sometimes he sent word through staff. Sometimes he texted just before 9, running late, do not wait, still at the office. The messages grew shorter as the days passed. Not rude, not openly cold, yet stripped of the warmth he once gave without effort. They looked like notes sent to manage inconvenience rather than words meant for a wife. Avalise felt the difference in her body before she named it in her mind. She started checking the time too often, started listening for the elevator, started glancing at her phone during meals she used to enjoy. Even when he was home, part of him remained elsewhere. He would sit at the edge of the sofa with a file open, answer one question with 2 words, then fall into silence deep enough to keep her on the outside of him. One night, she sent him a simple message, just before 7. Will you be home for dinner? His reply came 9 minutes later. No. Busy. Nothing else. No tenderness. No explanation. No small line to bridge the distance. Avalise stared at the screen longer than she should have. 3 letters should not have had the power to wound, yet they did. Because they were not only 3 letters, they were a door closing in plain sight. Avalise did not react to the distance with drama. She reacted with care. At first, she tried to meet Zevran where she believed he was, under pressure, overworked, trapped inside a storm he had not yet found language for. She kept dinner warm longer. She left tea on his side of the desk when he came home late. She asked simple questions without accusation. How was the day? Did you eat? Is there anything you want to tell me? She gave him room to speak in his own time, because she knew he had never been a man who opened easily under strain. But grace starts to bleed when it meets a wall too many times. One night, she found him standing by the windows near midnight, phone in hand, city light cutting across one side of his face. He looked exhausted, the kind of exhausted that lived in the bones. She walked over quietly and rested a hand against his back. You have not been here, even when you are here, she said. He covered her hand with his for a second, yet the gesture felt tired, almost automatic. I'm fixing something. That was all. No truth, no doorway, no trust. Avalise swallowed the disappointment and tried again the next day in a softer way. She suggested breakfast outside the penthouse before his meetings began. He cancelled. She asked if they could take a drive that weekend, even just an hour away from the city. He said he could not leave things unattended right now. She asked whether the family was in trouble. He looked at her too long before answering. Nothing you need to worry about. The line landed badly, because worry was already in the room. All he had done was tell her she had no right to stand inside it with him. Still, she kept trying. She sat beside him on the sofa one evening, while he reviewed reports, and said, You do not have to protect me from every hard thing. I know. Do you? That question finally pulled his eyes from the page. For one brief moment, she thought he might speak. Truly speak. His jaw tightened. His hand closed over the file. Please, trust me, he said. I'm handling it. This time, something in her shifted, not into anger first, into pain. Avalise rose from the sofa and stepped back, not because she wanted distance, but because standing there hurt less than sitting beside a man who kept choosing silence over partnership. Her voice stayed calm, yet the wound inside it was plain. You keep saying that like trust means staying blind. He stood too, but not close enough to hold her. That is not what I mean. Then tell me what you do mean, Zevran. Tell me why your mother is acting like I am part of some performance. Tell me why dinners feel like appointments I keep alone. Tell me why every answer I get sounds like I am outside my own marriage asking permission to understand it. He looked at her with conflict written all through him. A man wanting to speak. A man refusing to. A man so trained to manage damage that he could not see the damage happening right in front of him. When he said nothing, the silence became its own answer. After that night, the penthouse stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like a place where answers were being kept from her on purpose. Nothing in it changed on the surface. The lamps still glowed warm in the evenings. The books still sat where she had placed them. Music still filled the rooms when she turned it on, though more often now she let silence take over because it suited the truth better. The bed remained made. The kitchen remained beautiful. The city still stretched beyond the glass in 1,000 lights. Yet beneath all of it, something had shifted into a colder shape. Avalise moved through her own life, like a guest with full access and no real place in it. She knew when Zevran left. She knew when he returned. She knew the sound of his steps, the faint click of his phone set down on marble, the slow exhale he gave when he thought no one was listening. Yet she no longer knew where his mind lived, what danger was closing in, or why the people around him had started acting as if she were both important and unworthy of the truth at the same time. That was the cruelty of it. She was not abandoned in any obvious way. He still kissed her forehead some nights. He still asked whether she had eaten. He still reached for her hand in public when cameras flashed or board members watched. To the world, they looked united, elegant, secure, the sort of couple people admired from a distance and envied without knowing better. But Avalise had started to understand a painful truth. A marriage did not need screaming to become lonely. It did not need betrayal in plain sight to begin breaking apart. Sometimes all it took was one person deciding that love meant management instead of openness. One person keeping the hard facts locked away while the other stood smiling beside them, expected to trust what they were not allowed to see. One afternoon she sat alone at the dining table long after lunch had gone cold, staring at a file Zevran had left behind by mistake. She did not open it, not because she lacked curiosity, because she refused to become a thief inside her own marriage in order to feel included in it. That choice hurt more than searching would have. By evening, Zevran sent another message. Late tonight. Do not wait up. Avalise read it once and set the phone face down. For the first time since marrying him, she felt a thought rise inside her that she did not want, yet could not push away. She was still wearing the ring, still living in the penthouse, still answering to his name, yet somehow, piece by piece, she was being placed outside the life that was supposed to belong to both of them. The night her marriage cracked open begins like any other night she has spent trying to stay hopeful. Avalise enters the building tired from a charity planning meeting, one hand wrapped around her phone, the other holding the strap of her bag. The elevator carries her upward through silver light and mirrored walls, and she tells herself she will try one more time to reach him gently. No pressure, no accusation, just honesty. She will ask if he can sit with her for 10 minutes. She will ask if there is anything he has not said. She will ask whether they are still standing on the same side of this marriage. When the penthouse doors open, she knows at once something is wrong. Usually, the place greets her with some sign of life. A lamp in the living room, music low in the background, the faint sound of Zevran moving somewhere deeper inside. That night, the silence feels arranged, too neat, too still. Only one warm lamp glows down the hallway, and the line of light coming from the bedroom cuts across the floor like a warning. She takes a few steps forward, slowly now. Her pulse changes before her thoughts do. Then she hears his voice, low, tight, controlled, not the voice he uses at the table, not the voice he uses when he tells her good night. This one sounds hidden, urgent, meant for a conversation no one else should hear. She stops outside the half-closed bedroom door, every instinct suddenly awake. For one last second, she hopes she is wrong, hopes there is a simple answer waiting just beyond the wood. Instead, she hears the sentence that tears the ground out from under her. She had not planned to return that early. The charity meeting ended ahead of schedule after a last-minute donor cancelled, leaving the room full of half-finished notes, polite goodbyes, and women already turning their attention to the next event on their calendars. Avalise could have stayed longer. She could have gone with the others for a late drink, or allowed herself another hour outside the penthouse. Instead, she chose home, not because the evening had been pleasant, because she missed her husband. That truth hurts more later. On the drive back, she sits near the window and watches Chicago pass in ribbons of light and dark glass. She thinks about the distance that has settled between them and makes a quiet decision. She will not spend another night pretending silence is temporary if it has already become habit. She will go home, wash off the evening, and ask Zevran to speak plainly. No careful circling, no waiting for the perfect moment. She wants truth, even if it is hard. That is the state she enters the penthouse in, tired, open, and still willing to fight for them, which is why the stillness hits her so sharply. Nothing inside the home feels natural. The air seems untouched, as if the rooms have been holding themselves stiff. No low music, no clink of glass in the kitchen, no distant murmur from a call taken in his office. Even the city beyond the windows feels farther away than usual. The place does not feel empty. It feels paused. Avalise notices details she would normally ignore. One lamp left on instead of several, the faint line of light beneath the bedroom door, his coat thrown over a chair, which means he is home, the lack of movement, which means he is not resting. Her body reads the signs before her mind arranges them into fear. By the time she reaches the hallway, her hope has thinned into something tighter. Not yet heartbreak, not yet certainty. Only the cold warning that whatever waits behind that door does not belong to the kind of home she thought she had. The words do not strike her like noise. They strike her like proof. She still trusts me. After tomorrow, she signs. Then I end this marriage. For one suspended second, Avalise does not breathe. Her hand remains near the door frame, her body fixed in place, her thoughts too stunned to move at the speed of the damage. She hears his voice clearly enough to know there is no mistake in the sentence. No softness hidden inside it, no comfort waiting in the space after. It sounds decided, measured, final. Cold rushes through her first. Not tears, not anger, cold. The kind that starts low in the stomach and travels upward, until even the air feels thin. Her heart begins pounding hard enough to drown everything else, and for a moment the hallway itself seems unstable beneath her feet. She stares at the half-open door, as though it might open wider and offer some correction, some missing line, some truth that could still protect what she thought she had. Nothing comes. Only the silence after the whisper, which feels worse than the whisper itself, because silence suggests certainty. In that instant, every fear she has tried to dismiss gathers into one brutal shape. He has been distant. He has been hiding something. Papers have been waiting. His mother has been circling. He has kept telling her to trust him while standing somewhere she cannot reach. Avalise does not need a full explanation to feel the wound. What she hears is enough. A husband she loves is speaking about their marriage like a move on a board, and she is the one piece in the room that was never meant to know. Once the whisper lands, the past few months stop looking confusing. They start looking connected. Avalise stands in that hallway and feels memory hit her in sharp pieces. The untouched dinners, the messages with no warmth, the long nights where Zevran stood by the windows with his phone in hand and gave her nothing except, "I'm fixing something." The car ride after the gala, when she asked why his voice only appeared in private while his mother chipped at her in public. His answer returns now, like a wound reopened. "Let me handle it." She sees Merith too, that careful smile, those polished little cuts dressed as advice, the way she spoke about readiness, family pressure, and public appearances, as if Avalise were an object to position, not a wife to protect. At the time, Avalise told herself she was being tested. Now she feels something harsher, prepared, managed, kept calm while plans moved around her. The papers he asked her to review flashed through her mind next. Asset restructuring, legal language, signatures waiting. At the time, she trusted him enough not to read danger into them. In the hallway, trust turns against her. She hears the whisper again, and every page suddenly looks like part of the same design. That is what breaks her deepest. Not only the thought of losing him, the shame of feeling foolish inside a marriage she defended with her whole heart. Avalise does not open the bedroom door. She does not ask who he is speaking to. She does not wait for more words. She does not offer him the chance to arrange the truth before she can feel the full cut of it. Something inside her knows that if she stands there 1 second longer, she will either break in that hallway or walk into that room with pain all over her face. She chooses neither. She steps back in silence and moves toward the guest room on legs that barely feel like her own. Once inside, she shuts the door softly, almost carefully, as if the smallest sound might make this real in a way she still cannot bear. Then she reaches for a suitcase. Her hands move with a strange steadiness. A few dresses, blouses, toiletries, her passport, her charger, enough to leave with dignity, nothing more. When she opens the drawer and sees her jewelry case, she pauses. Her fingers find the wedding ring. She slides it off, holds it tight, then stares at it through blurred vision. No, she thinks, not like this. She slips it back on, not as forgiveness, not as hope, as choice. By the time the sky begins to pale, she is in the elevator with one suitcase and a face gone still from too much pain. She leaves no note on the table, sends no message, offers no farewell. Some wounds speak clearly enough without words. When the city wakes, Avalise Wren is already on her way out of Chicago, carrying a broken heart and the first hard shape of a life she will have to rebuild herself. Savannah receives Avalise without questions, but not without weight. Odessa opens the apartment door before sunrise, takes one look at her face, and steps aside. No speech meant to fix pain. No forced comfort. She carries the suitcase in, sets a glass of water on the table, and leaves the guest room lamp on before closing the door halfway behind her. That quiet kindness nearly breaks Avalise more than pity would have. Sleep never fully comes. She lies awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling while the whisper keeps returning with cruel precision. She still trusts me. After tomorrow, she signs. Then I end this marriage. Each time the words replay, they sound cleaner, colder, more deliberate. Her mind keeps reaching for missing pieces, hoping some detail will shift their meaning. Nothing shifts. Morning comes, then another night, then another. She drifts for minutes at a time, only to wake with her heart racing as if she is still standing outside that bedroom door. Odessa tries once. Do you want to talk? Avalise turns toward the window, voice thin from exhaustion. Not until I know whether speaking will help or ruin me more. So the days pass in low silence, tea gone cold, curtains half drawn, and pain settling into her like weather that refuses to move. At first, Zevran reaches for her the way he handles everything else, with control. His first calls come early and close together, not frantic but firm, as if he still believes this can be corrected through timing and explanation. When she does not answer, the messages begin. Please answer. You heard something out of context. I need to explain this in person. They arrive with the clean restraint of a man still trying to manage damage before it grows larger. Avalise reads them without replying. Each one leaves a fresh ache behind, not because they sound cruel, but because none of them erase what she heard with her own ears. By the second day, the tone changes. Do not sign anything until we speak. Avalise, please. Please do not shut me out. Then longer messages follow, arriving late at night and too early in the morning, as if he has stopped sleeping. He tells her he knows how bad it looks. He tells her he deserves her anger. He asks for one conversation, one chance, 1 hour face to face. The control is still there, but it is breaking at the edges. Odessa sees her staring at the screen one evening and asks, "Do you believe him?" Avalise locks the phone and sets it down. "I believe he wants access to me," she says quietly. I do not know yet whether that is the same as truth. The package arrives on the 4th day. It is delivered in the late morning, thick, formal, and far too clean for the mess sitting inside Avalice's chest. Odessa brings it in from the door and places it on the table without comment. The return label carries Zevran's legal office, which makes Avalice's stomach tighten before she even breaks the seal. Inside, the papers are arranged with brutal order. A settlement, asset transfer documents, immediate protections, and one property deed. She reads the pages slowly, her hands steady only because shock has its own kind of stillness. The settlement is generous enough to feel like an ending written by someone who expects never to be forgiven. Yet it is the deed that stops her cold, a restored-in property on the Georgia coast, not a random holding, not a convenient investment, a real place, one she recognizes from a conversation months earlier when she told Zevran her quiet dream of bringing an old house back to life and turning it into a refuge for tired people. Odessa leans over her shoulder and goes still. He bought your dream. Avalice looks at the signature line, the transfer date, the legal finality of it all. Not bought, she thinks, prepared, and somehow that hurts in a different way. At the bottom of the stack, beneath the legal pages and property transfer forms, Avalice finds one sheet written by hand. That alone unsettles her. Zevran does not write by hand unless something matters enough to step outside habit. His words are neat, firm, and stripped of decoration, which makes them harder to dismiss as performance. I bought this for your dream, not for your silence. If you never come back, it is still yours. You were never meant to be used. I was trying to pull you out before the damage reached you. I did it the wrong way. I have done many things right in business and almost everything wrong in love. Take the inn, take your peace. I will not fight you for either. By the time she reaches the last line, Avalice has stopped seeing the page clearly. Not because the letter erases the wound. It does not. Not because it makes his silence noble. It does not. It hurts because the voice inside it sounds like the man she loved, honest, tired, and finally stripped of control. Odessa watches her fold the page with shaking fingers. That sounds real. Avalice swallows hard. That is the problem. Avalice does not decide in one dramatic moment. She decides quietly, the way she has always made the hardest choices in her life. The next morning, she spreads the property papers across Odessa's kitchen table and reads them again with clearer eyes. The pain is still there. The betrayal is still sharp. Yet beneath both sits something else now, a narrow line of purpose. The inn is real, weathered, neglected, waiting. It is not an apology she has to wear. It is a place she could turn into work, into structure, into breath. Odessa studies her face. If you take it, make sure you take it for you. Avalice nods once. I will. That afternoon she signs the acceptance documents, not as surrender, not as reunion, as survival. Days later, when she first stands outside the old coastal property, sea wind moving through the grass and salt resting in the air, she sees everything at once, peeling paint, tired beams, broken railings, and the stubborn beauty still standing under all of it. Most people would see burden. Avalice sees a beginning. For the first time since leaving Chicago, she does not feel like a woman waiting for an answer from someone else. She feels like herself again. The inn looked nothing like a dream when Avalice first stepped fully inside. Salt had eaten into the railings. The front porch sagged at one corner. Window frames were cracked, paint lifted in curls, and the floorboards complained under every step. Inside, the air carried dust, damp wood, and the stale stillness of a place left alone too long. One wall in the main sitting room showed water damage near the ceiling. 2 guest rooms had torn wallpaper hanging loose in strips. The kitchen needed new fixtures, the plumbing needed work, and the back stairs looked like one hard storm could finish what neglect had started. Most people would have felt defeated. Avalice felt challenged. She walked the property room by room with a notebook in hand, writing fast, measuring damage, marking what could be saved and what had to go. By noon, her jeans were streaked with dust and her palms held faint splinters. By evening, she had already pulled loose boards from the porch, cleared broken pieces from the west hallway, and opened every window she could force upward just to let the building breathe again. The work was not graceful. It was hot, heavy, physical, and honest. Her shoulders ached. Her hands burned. Sweat gathered at the base of her neck. Yet every stripped wall, every lifted nail, every ruined board set aside gave her something pain had almost taken from her: direction. Once the first shock of the inn's condition passed, Avalise gave herself something stronger than emotion: routine. She rose early, often before the sun had fully cleared the horizon. The mornings near the coast came with soft grey light, cool air, and the sound of water moving somewhere beyond the property line. She would tie her hair back, make coffee strong enough to wake her body before her thoughts fully formed, and walk through the day's plan with a pencil in hand. Lumber deliveries, paint samples, permit calls, floor repairs, window restoration. Every task received a place. Every hour had purpose. That structure saved her. Heartbreak had left too much empty space inside her, and Avalise understood early that empty space could turn dangerous if she fed it too long. So she filled her days with work that asked something real of her. She sanded old wood until her arms trembled. She scrubbed surfaces stained by time. She met with electricians, roofers, and local suppliers who soon learned she was kind, clear, and not easy to dismiss. If anyone tried to speak around her instead of to her, she corrected it with calm precision. The inn changed slowly, then steadily. So did she. There was pride in the way she moved now. Not loud pride, not bitterness dressed as strength, something cleaner. She was not waiting for Zevran to explain her life back to her. She was not standing still in savannah counting old wounds. She was building with her own hands again, and each finished task reminded her of who she had been long before she ever wore Holloway as a last name. Self-respect returned in pieces. In the firm way she negotiated prices without apology, in the way she used her own savings first, in the way she refused to let grief make her careless with herself. By the end of each day, she was exhausted in a way that felt earned. Her body hurt, but her spirit no longer felt helpless. Odessa never treated Avalise like broken glass. That was one of the reasons her presence mattered so much. She came down to the coast often, sometimes for a day, sometimes for a weekend, usually with groceries in one hand and an opinion already waiting in the other. She did not arrive with soft speeches or careful questions shaped to avoid discomfort. Odessa believed love should be steady, honest, and useful. If Avalise looked exhausted, she said so. If the workers tried to cut corners, Odessa noticed before lunch. If silence stretched too long, she broke it with blunt truth instead of pity. "You are allowed to be hurt," she told Avalise one afternoon while helping scrape old paint from a window frame. "You are not allowed to vanish inside it." Avalise gave a tired half-smile. "You always make healing sound like an order, because sometimes it is." That was Odessa, loyal enough to sit through the worst days without demanding explanation, strong enough to remind Avalise who she had been before love wounded her. She cooked when Avalise forgot to eat. She argued with suppliers who tried to overcharge. She slept on the old downstairs sofa when storms got bad and the house felt too large at night. More than that, she gave Avalise one thing Chicago had stopped giving her: safety without performance. Around Odessa, she did not need to act composed before she was ready. She could stand in the middle of the half-restored kitchen, covered in dust, angry for no clean reason, and still be met with steadiness instead of judgment. That kind of friendship did not erase pain, but it made pain less lonely. While Avalise rebuilt by the coast, Zevran's world in Chicago began losing its polished shield. The audit had moved past quiet concern. Board members who once trusted the Holloway name without hesitation now asked harder questions in colder rooms. Old transfers linked to his father's hidden dealings drew legal attention. Advisors who had spent years protecting the family's image started thinking first about their own survival. In another season, Zevran might have contained the damage behind private negotiations and careful press language. This time, he did something different. He stopped protecting what deserved exposure. He separated personal holdings from family-controlled structures. He blocked attempts to attach Avalise's name to any review tied to the company. He cut off 2 senior advisors who suggested the marriage could be presented as strategic distance from the scandal. When Merith pushed for unity in public and silence in private, Zevran rejected both. For the first time in front of people who mattered, he made it clear the worst threat to the Holloway legacy had not been outsiders. It had been the family's own choices. That stand cost him. He lost leverage inside the board, lost easy loyalty, lost the smooth support that had once followed his name. Yet, in losing all that, he began showing a kind of truth Avalise had begged for long before she left. By the time summer began, leaning toward its hottest days, the inn no longer looked abandoned, and neither did Avalise. The porch stood straight again. Fresh paint lifted the front rooms into light. Curtains moved softly with the sea breeze through windows she had fought to restore instead of replace. The main hall carried the clean scent of wood, linen, and effort. Everywhere she looked, there was proof of labor turned into beauty. Not perfect beauty, honest beauty. The kind that comes from care, not display. She changed with the house. The ache Zevran left behind had not vanished, but it no longer ruled the shape of her days. She laughed more easily with Odessa. She slept longer without waking to the echo of that bedroom whisper. She made decisions without imagining how they would fit inside someone else's world. For the first time in months, she felt rooted in her own life again. That was the real victory. Not that she had survived heartbreak, that she had refused to let heartbreak become her identity. So tell me this, does broken trust deserve another chance once real change begins, or are some wounds too deep to risk the heart again? Leave your answer in the comments and stay with this story, because the man who failed her is not done fighting to become someone worthy of standing beside her. He comes on a grey afternoon when the sky hangs low over the coast and the wind carries the smell of salt through the open windows. Avalise is on a ladder in the front room, fixing a curtain rod that refuses to sit straight. When she hears a vehicle pull up outside, she expects a supplier, maybe a contractor who has come late again. She does not expect silence after the engine cuts. No second door, no quick footsteps from staff, no polished voice calling ahead to make space for a man used to being announced. When she looks through the front window, Zevran Holloway is standing alone. No driver waits near the car. No assistant carries files behind him. No dark coat draped with city perfection. He wears plain work boots dusted from the road, dark trousers, and a simple coat that has seen actual weather. His hair is slightly out of place from the wind. For the first time since she has known him, he does not look like a man entering a room he owns. He looks like a man asking permission to stand in it. Avalise climbs down slowly, every part of her going still. He remains near the doorway instead of crossing it. That matters. So does the way he keeps his hands empty, his posture quiet, his distance careful. When their eyes meet, there is no polished line waiting on his mouth. Only truth, heavy enough to change the air. For one dangerous second, her body remembers him before her mind can stop it. It remembers the way his presence used to steady a room, the way his hands once reached for her with care instead of demand, the way late evenings in Chicago had softened when he stepped near, tie loosened, voice lower, eyes fixed on her, as if the rest of the world had finally gone quiet. Memory rises fast, without permission, and it angers her almost as much as the pain itself. Her chest tightens, not from fear, from recognition. He is standing in front of her, changed in ways small enough to miss if she did not know him so well. He holds himself with less command. He does not wear power like armor. Even his silence feels different, not cold, careful, as if he knows he has no right to ask for ease. Avalise hates that some part of her still feels the old pull, hates that her pulse stirs at the sight of him after everything that happened, hates that love leaves traces in the body long after trust has been torn open. So pride steps in where instinct nearly fails her. "What are you doing here?" she asks. Her voice lands calm, but it carries steel now. Zevran does not move closer. "Seeing if you would let me tell the truth." They stand in the front room with the sea wind moving faintly through the open windows, and for the first time since she left Chicago, Zevran stops trying to manage the truth into something easier. "The audit reached further than I expected," he says. "What my father buried was worse than the early reports showed. Old shell partnerships, concealed losses, transfers tied to names that should never have touched the company. If it all came into the open at once, the legal fallout would not stop with the board. It would spread to anyone linked closely enough to the family. Avalise says nothing. She wants the full weight of it. Zevran keeps going. The call you heard was with Tavian, not another woman, not a private plan against you. He was helping me move clean legal distance around you before the damage could reach your name. His jaw tightens before the hardest part. The papers were meant to separate your assets, your signature, your future from the Holloway fallout. I said I would end the marriage on paper if I had to, because I thought losing you publicly was better than letting my family bury you with us. The room goes quiet after that. Not because the facts are unclear, because the truth, at last, is. Avalise hears him through to the end. She hears the audit, the hidden damage, Tavian, the legal distance, the paper protection, the plan to cut her free before the Holloway name dragged her into a public collapse she did not create. And when he finishes, she believes the facts. That is what makes it hurt in a new way, because truth does not always heal. Sometimes it sharpens the wound by proving the damage came from someone who meant well and still chose wrong. She folds her arms slowly, more to hold herself steady than to shut him out. So you were protecting me? Yes, by deciding my future without me. Zevran does not answer. Avalise steps closer, not with softness, but with clarity. You keep talking about keeping me clean, keeping me safe, keeping me out of it. Do you hear yourself? Every version of your plan still begins with you choosing for me. The words land hard because they are clean. You did not trust me enough to stand beside me with the truth, she says. You trusted yourself enough to build an exit around me and call it love. His face shifts then, not in anger, not in defense, but in the quiet recognition of a man hearing the ugliest version of his own failure spoken plainly. Avalise feels tears threaten, but her voice stays steady. I believe what you are saying about the audit. I believe the call was with Tavian. I even believe you thought you were saving me, but none of that changes what you made me feel. Small, managed, shut out, disposable. She lets the last word sit between them. Do you understand that part? Zevran does not interrupt her. He does not correct her wording. He does not reach for some polished line to make himself sound noble. He only stands there in work boots and silence, letting every word strike where it should. Yes, he says at last, his voice low. I understand that part. Avalise searches his face, almost waiting for the old instinct to return. The control, the explanation, the careful way he used to turn pain into something he could manage. It does not come. You have every right to hate how I handled it, he says. I thought protection mattered more than honesty. I thought if I carried the damage alone, I was doing the right thing. All I did was make you feel alone inside a marriage where I promised you safety. He lowers his eyes for a moment, then looks back at her, with no shield left. I was wrong. The words land with more weight, because he does not dress them up. Avalise feels the anger in her still, fierce and alive, yet now it stands beside something harder to bear, the sight of a man who is finally telling the truth without trying to win anything from it. I am not asking you to forgive me today, Zevran says. I am asking you to know that your anger is deserved. And this time, when silence fills the room, it is not hiding. It is paying. After that first visit, Zevran does not vanish, and he does not rush her either. He returns the next week in the same quiet way he arrived the first time, alone, dressed simply, carrying none of the sharp distance that once followed him through every room. Sometimes he comes with nothing in his hands, sometimes with hardware she actually needs, because he remembered a loose comment she made about supply delays. He never assumes he can walk inside. He stops near the porch or by the open gate and waits until she sees him. That restraint matters. Avalise does not welcome him warmly. She does not ask him to stay long. Some days she gives him 10 minutes. Some days only a look and one cold question. Yet he keeps coming back with the patience of a man who has finally understood that love cannot be forced open after it has been shut in pain. He does not use grand speeches. He does not ask for another chance every time. He simply shows up, week after week, in sun, in wind, in grey weather that leaves the inn smelling of salt and wet wood. Odessa notices it too, though she pretends not to at first. He is either serious, she mutters one afternoon, watching Zevran stand outside until Avalise nods once, or deeply stubborn. Avalise keeps her eyes on the porch rail she is sanding. Maybe both, she says. Not every visit goes well. Some afternoons leave the air tighter than before he arrived. Zevran says something careful, and Avalise hears the old instinct beneath it. The habit of shaping truth too neatly, the habit of stepping around the ugliest part instead of standing fully inside it. On those days, her patience thins fast. "You are still trying to sound in control," she tells him once, standing in the half-finished dining room with dust on her shirt and anger in her eyes. "I do not need polished regret. I need plain truth." He takes the blow without argument, but it still hurts them both. He leaves before sunset, and the quiet after his car disappears feels raw and unsettled. Yet other visits change shape in smaller ways. A loose board gets fixed without tension. A short conversation lasts longer than expected. She asks one question instead of none. He answers without trimming the hard edges. One evening they end up standing on the porch at dusk after discussing window frames, and for a few calm minutes neither of them speaks about the past at all. They watch the sky shift, hear the distant water, and share a silence that does not feel like punishment. That is how trust begins returning. Not in one grand moment. In fragments, both of them almost miss. What surprises Avalise most is not that Zevran keeps coming, it is the way he behaves once she lets him stay. In Chicago, he was a man used to directing rooms without raising his voice. People moved when he spoke. Plans shifted around his timing. Money solved delays before effort ever had to. At the inn, none of that helps him. A crooked porch rail does not care about status. A jammed window frame does not bend for a last name. And for once, Zevran does not try to turn the work into something grand or symbolic. He asks where to start. That matters more than he knows. Avalise hands him tasks that are real but ordinary. Carrying lumber to the shed, holding a ladder steady, scraping old paint, sorting hardware into small trays on the kitchen table. He does each one without complaint. He does not try to redesign her plans, correct her methods, or offer money as a shortcut every time the work grows rough. Even Odessa notices. "Well," she says dryly one afternoon, while watching him haul storm wet boards toward the back porch. At least he knows how to sweat. Avalise almost smiles, because this is new. Not a powerful man performing humility. A man learning how to stand beside her without trying to own the ground under her feet. The deeper change does not show first in Zevran's hands. It shows in his honesty. Before, he used truth like a tool, measured, controlled, released only when he thought the timing served the outcome. At the inn, that habit starts to fall apart. Avalise notices it in the way he answers now. He stops hiding behind polished phrases. He stops trying to sound untouchable. When a truth makes him look smaller, he says it anyway. One afternoon, while they sort old brass handles at the kitchen table, she asks the question he once would have avoided. "Were you afraid for me, or afraid to lose control?" Zevran does not rush the answer. "Both," he says. "I was afraid for you. I was also afraid of what happened if I let anyone see I was not handling it." Avalise says nothing, so he keeps going. "I was raised to believe weakness invites damage. I wore that lesson so long, I stopped knowing the difference between strength and concealment." That line settles heavily between them, because it does not excuse him. It exposes him, and for the first time, Avalise hears a man who is no longer trying to win by looking powerful. She hears a man willing to be seen as flawed, frightened, and wrong, if truth is the price of standing near her at all. The storm hits hard just after dusk. Wind rattles the restored windows, rain lashes the porch, and one violent crack of thunder knocks the power out across the inn. The rooms fall into darkness so quickly that Avalise pauses mid-step with a folded towel in her hands. For a moment, the only sounds are rain on the roof and the old house settling around them. Zevran finds the candles first. He lights 3 and sets them along the kitchen counter. their glow turning the room soft and gold. Odessa has already gone back to Savannah, so it is only the two of them, tired, damp from the rush to pull supplies inside, and quieter than usual after an evening spent repairing storm damage along the east fence. Avalise reheats soup on the gas range. Zevran finds two chipped bowls from the lower cabinet and places them on the table without being asked. They sit facing each other in the candlelight, sleeves rolled, hands worn from work, rain still ticking against the dark windows. For a while, neither speaks. Then Zevran looks at her and says, "I used to think love meant protecting someone from every hard thing. I see now that love without truth is only another kind of distance." Avalise holds his gaze across the table. This time, his honesty does not sound polished. It sounds earned. Opening weekend arrives with soft coastal light, clean linen, and the quiet kind of beauty Avalise always trusted most. The inn no longer carries the tired weight of neglect. The porch stands straight, the windows shine, the floors glow with care, and every room holds the calm warmth of a place restored with respect instead of vanity. Fresh flowers sit near the front desk. Curtains move gently in the sea breeze. Low music drifts through the hall, and the scent of cedar, polished wood, and breakfast rolls through the air. Guests begin arriving before noon. A retired couple pauses in the front hall to admire the staircase. A young woman runs her fingertips over the carved banister and smiles at the detail. A family from Atlanta checks in early and asks who designed the rooms, because nothing feels generic or staged. Every compliment lands, yet Avalise does not stand there chasing praise. She welcomes people with steady grace, answers questions, guides staff, and watches the house do what she hoped it would do all along. It breathes again, and this time, so does she. By late afternoon, when the first rush of arrivals settles into a calmer rhythm, Avalise steps into the main hall and lets herself take in what stands around her. Not as a wounded wife, not as a woman someone once tried to protect by shutting her out. As herself, the inn holds her everywhere. In the restored trim she refused to replace, in the warm lamps chosen to soften the evenings, in the old wood polished back to dignity, in the careful balance between comfort and character that no hired designer could have faked. Every room carries proof of her eye, her labor, her discipline, and the quiet steel that kept her standing when pain could have pulled her apart. For a moment, she rests one hand on the banister and looks across the space with a stillness deeper than pride. She built this not from ease, from heartbreak, dust, long days, aching hands, permit calls, hard choices, and the refusal to let one shattered chapter become her whole story. The life around her now does not depend on apology, status, or anyone else's permission to exist. That truth steadies her in a way love once did. And that is why, when she hears Zevran's voice, somewhere beyond the front desk later that evening, her heart moves, but her center does not. The last guests settle in after dinner, and the inn grows quieter by degrees. Footsteps soften upstairs. Doors close gently. Laughter fades into distant comfort. Downstairs, the lamps cast a warm hush through the hallway, and the old house holds the kind of peace Avalise once feared she might never feel again. She is carrying fresh linens toward one of the upstairs rooms when Zevran appears at the far end of the corridor. He does not interrupt her at once. He only watches for a second, as if taking in the sight of her inside the life she rebuilt. Not as a man reclaiming something, as a man still humbled by what he almost lost. "There's one room left you haven't seen finished," she says after a moment. His eyes search hers, careful as ever now. "Are you asking me to?" Avalise gives a small nod. She leads him down the hall and opens the final bedroom. The room is beautiful in a quiet, deliberate way. Cream walls, soft lamplight, a restored walnut dresser near the window, white linen layered with muted blue, a reading chair by the corner. Nothing excessive, nothing loud, only care, only calm. Yet the second Zevran steps inside, the meaning beneath the room changes. Avalise feels it too, because a bedroom was where everything broke. A half-closed door, a low voice, a whisper that split trust wide open. For one breath, the old memory rises so sharply she can almost feel that Chicago hallway under her feet again. The lamp, the silence, the cold rush through her body before the pain fully reached her. She stands still, one hand resting against the linen she came to place down, and Zevran sees the shift in her face at once. He does not pretend not to. That is the difference now. The air in the room changes the moment the memory touches her. Avalise does not need to explain it. Zevran reads it in the stillness of her shoulders, in the way her gaze drifts for one brief second toward the door, in the quiet ache that passes over her face before she can hide it. The wound is old now, yet not gone. Some pain does not stay loud. It settles deeper and waits for the right room, the right light, the right silence to return. Zevran steps no closer than he must. No more whispers, he says softly. Not in doorways, not behind you, not where you are left alone with half the truth. Avalise keeps her eyes on him, and this time he does not speak like a man trying to save himself. He speaks like a man who has finally learned what truth costs when it comes late. I failed you where love mattered most, he says. Not because I did not love you, but because I thought control was safer than honesty. I made choices around you. I let silence do damage I should have stopped with my own voice. You did not deserve any part of that. Her throat tightens. He goes on, steady and unguarded. If you never gave me more than this moment, I would still owe you that truth. You were never hard to love. You were the clearest thing in my life. I was the one who did not know how to love clearly. That is what breaks the last wall inside her. Not a grand line, not regret dressed to sound beautiful, but the humility in it. The clean admission, the lack of defense. He is no longer asking her to admire his intention. He is naming his failure without reaching past it. Avalise sets the folded linen down on the bed. When she steps closer, it is not because the past is erased. It is because the truth now stands in the open where the silence once lived. Avalise stops in front of him with tears bright in her eyes. Yet her voice stays calm. I still love you, she says. But love does not return to the old version of us. Zevran nods at once. No hesitation, no wounded pride. It should not. So she tells him what must be different. No closed-door decisions made in her name. No silence dressed as protection. No family pressure allowed to enter their life without a line drawn in full daylight. Truth first, always, even when truth is ugly. Especially then. Zevran accepts every word, not like a man bargaining for access, like a man grateful for terms he should have honored from the start. When he reaches for her, he does it slowly, and when she steps into him, the embrace feels nothing like the one they might have shared in Chicago. This one is quieter, wiser, built on hurt, faced honestly instead of hidden behind polished control. Their kiss follows with tenderness, not urgency, and in that restored room, the wound that once broke her no longer owns the ending. Because love without honesty leaves damage. Silence inside marriage feels like abandonment. A woman should never shrink herself to keep a relationship alive. Pain changes a life, yet it does not erase worth. Real love stands on truth, respect, and steady effort. Now, tell me, what would you have done in Avalise's place? Did Zevran deserve a second chance? Like, share, comment, and subscribe for more deep romance stories with strong life lessons.